If we take a beat to reflect on our preteen and teenage years, what comes to mind? Hazy memories, displaced angst, fleeting but extreme senses of joy, and even, for some, the worst trauma that they have experienced to date. But the truth of the matter is, if you're listening to this right now, you're alive. You've moved past that point in your life and on to other stages and new things. Growing up, potentially stopping from time to time to reminisce on the person you were back then. But what if the worst and last day of your life came too soon? When you were just a kid? What if it all stopped there? Abby and Libby experienced more fear and pain in just over an hour than most of us will experience in our entire lives. As Doug Carter says, how could you do this to two children? Abby and Libby were by all means two very ordinary Midwest teens who were discovering their likes and dislikes, their own view of the world, and their own sense of self-esteem. However, they were not ordinary in the sense that they fell into a demographic that could fit onto the eye of a needle, victims of a double homicide in a public place in broad daylight. We've spent hours, days, and even years at this point trying to figure out how something like this could happen, something so rare. Crime Dive is here to tell you today that there is more to the entirety of this case than we previously knew. We're going to share some information with you from an extremely good source, someone that was there on day one and wants this solved just as much as we do, a Carroll County figurehead. Yes, this crime was lightning in a bottle, but we believe it is not what it seems. It has been disclosed to us that the killer did not intend to kill the girls in the location where their bodies were found. Law enforcement does not believe Ron Logan's property was pre-selected out by the killer. With that being said, and our source speaking so definitively, we can only surmise one possibility as to why the bodies ended up on Ron Logan's property. It's great to say this with confidence. Finally, the girls fought back against their attacker by trying to escape. This also makes sense given several of law enforcement's statements, such as they stuck together, there were multiple chances for one of the girls to get away, and both of the girls are heroes. Furthermore, to us, this insinuates that the crime was a failed abduction attempt, either related to human trafficking or in order for the girls to be assaulted and potentially killed at a secondary location.
With all of these things in mind, let us dive in to the identity of this man and correct any misconceptions we may have concerning him. He is a stark reminder that evil lives among us, walking toe-to-toe, working quietly, a friend, a cousin, a father, maybe even a brother. Maybe there's one of you, one of our viewers. Maybe you've struggled with your suspicions of a person that you know. Maybe you thought about calling in a tip, but you're afraid that you'll get yourself into trouble, or that it will draw unwanted attention onto your family name. Any of these reasons for not calling the tip in are selfish. Do the right thing. Stop this cycle of pain that's been given to the families of the victims for the last almost 5 years. If you are in need of a liaison, you can contact our group personally on Facebook, and we will help you get info into the authorities. Our service as a group is non-exploitative. If a tip ends up going into law enforcement that leads to reward funds in any way, the cash will not be accepted by our organization. We are not bounty hunters. We are just looking for justice for these families. So please contact the authorities or contact us and we will do it for you. So who is this man? It's becoming ever more apparent that law enforcement believes this to be a conspiracy set up by persons. We believe that the girls were targeted at an opportune time by this mule, who botched the abduction. Had the girls separated when trying to flee, this would be possibly a very different outcome. The suspect would have had to choose which way to run. But this story is about love and loyalty, as tragic as it is. The simple fact is that at least one of the girls was his target. Because of law enforcement's designating Libby as the hero, and due to the content found in David Erskine's text, we have to assume that Abby was his target, and that Libby heroically tried to fight off the assailant. The suspect likely showed them a badge to coerce them down the hill. After all, this is where searchers found Libby's right shoe, likely indicating that this is the exact spot which the struggle first ensues. It makes sense that he would want to rig the game in his favor by getting them below the bridge, out of sight, into secluded areas to commence his ultimate plan. Based upon our sources' information, the girls likely did attempt to escape, running north towards the trails from which they came. Libby's second black Nike shoe was found by searchers at the edge of a shallow area of Deer Creek. From going to the crime scene in May, this makes sense. I believe that the girls running together came to the edge of the creek and stopped. Libby's shoe was likely stuck in the mud as they saw their killer approaching still. They ended up setting out across the creek, and her shoe comes off. As they cross, the suspect apprehends Libby, mortally wounding her in the water. Seconds later, he likely also apprehends Abby, who is likely in shock at this point.
We are confident that you have told someone what you have done. Or at the very least, they know, because of how different you are since the murders. The murderer. I believe you have just a little bit of a conscience left. And I can assure you that how you left them in that woods is not what they're experiencing today. I just want the family to know that when I take my last breath on this earth, I'll be thinking of them.
Insider info given to us months ago affirms that in fact the suspect might have dragged Libby up the bank of the creek on Logan's side. Some have speculated that because Libby was found nude, that a sexual assault may have occurred. It is our belief, however, that her wet clothing was removed only to shed their weight. She was reported to have bruising on her wrist consistent with perimortem injuries from being dragged by her wrists while she was dying. As terribly humiliated as he left them in the woods, the girls speak his name from beyond the grave in clues. There is also a rumor that the suspect attempted to pose the bodies. Not exactly the actions of an abductor, I would say, unless there were steps taken to attempt to deceive law enforcement officials. If this is the case, then this explains why the suspect has eluded capture. This also would appear to show that the suspect himself may have had knowledge of investigative techniques used by law enforcement. There is also an indication that given the choice for law enforcement to announce the new direction and sketch of the suspect, that they had become aware of something that led them to believe that they had been incorrect, or worse, deceived in the early parts of the investigation. Both of these may indicate a conspiracy of false information given potentially by someone from behind the county's roster of officials. This may, in fact, explain law enforcement's keeping information secret, as securing the info would create a blackout on a need-to-know basis, preventing any access to information by most high-ranking officials in the community. This year alone, there have been dozens of arrests for human trafficking in the state of Indiana, indicating that this issue is extremely widespread. And in 2019, 157 arrests were made in one of the largest mass sex trafficking rings in the entire nation. Might this explain what is happening here in this quaint small town? Might these things give reason to law enforcement's decisions to withhold evidence from the public? To the innocent citizens of Delphi, law enforcement's decisions make little sense. But to the guilty, April 2019 would have surely been a solid indicator that the ruse was up. This would also explain why law enforcement simply cannot exonerate anyone from the city. What it does indicate also is that something rare happened that day. Something so complicated that police are after the weakest link, their killer. Homicides are relatively rare in the United States, but in human trafficking cases, homicide is even rarer, due to the victims being viewed as a commodity for traffickers. So many questions, too little answers. Tune in next time when we go through the rest of the data we've received through discussions with our confidential insider.